Hello, so today we are going to be making Chelsea buns. So for today's ingredients you need 450 grams of strong plain flour. You're going to have 2 teaspoons of yeast, 50 grams of caster sugar, 150 millilitres of milk, 1 egg and 50 grams of butter. So I'm just going to start by heating up my butter just to melt it, and I'm going to put my 450 grams of flour. I'm going to add my 50 grams of sugar, get my 2 teaspoons of yeast, so just whilst we're waiting for that butter to melt, now that I've added all of this, I am going to ask you 2 questions here. So why is it important to measure really accurately? And what is the difference between this dough that we're doing today to an ordinary white loaf that we've done in year 7? So what's the difference between this dough that we're doing today and the white loaf, bread loaf, that you would do in year 7? So those questions again, just to remind you, why is it important to measure accurately, and what's the difference between this dough to a white bread loaf? So the other thing that I have just done is I have put my milk into the microwave for just 30 seconds just to warm it through, but because the butter is also going to be hot, that should be okay. So again, whilst I'm just waiting for that to happen, I'm just going to use my hand. So at this point all I'm doing is using my hand to mix everything together. So just stir everything round. I've already sieved my flour. So mixing it around, making sure that the yeast is well mixed through, that you're not seeing any lumps as we go. And then what I am going to do now that's all melted, I'm going to add my milk, going to add my butter, and I'm just going to use a wooden spoon at this point just to mix it together. And once I've done that, I'm then going to add my egg. So I'm not going to pre-mix it, just saving myself some washing up. And do that whilst it's all in there. So if you find your dough too wet at this point, and it's not, it's absorbed all the flour and it's too sticky, you can add a little bit of flour each time just to see what's happening. Or alternatively, if you find that it's not wet enough, but wait until you've really started to knead. So at this point I'm just going to bring everything in together. So if you find that you're starting to knead and really mix it together like I'm doing now, and it's not all coming together, you might need to add a little bit more milk, which it's looking like I'm going to be doing. So at this point, just whilst I'm starting to bring this together, another question is to what is the function of all of the ingredients? So why have we got butter? Why have we got the yeast, the sugar, the milk and the egg? What's the function of all of the ingredients? So I'm just going to add a little bit more milk. So I've not warmed this through, but that's okay just because there's not very much that we're using. And there we go. So that was about a teaspoon of milk that I've just added into there. I'm just continuing to mix. And then this is where we can then start to do that kneading process that we learnt in year 7. Again, if you find that this bit, it's a little bit sticky on the table, you can add a little bit of flour. And what you should start to see happening is that your hands then become quite dry as the dough comes off your hands and in there. But it's also taking the moisture out of your hands as well. So remember that you're kneading, stretch, roll, twist, stretch, roll, twist. And just continue that until your dough is smooth and elastic. Okay, it'll roughly take about 10 minutes. So once your dough is smooth and elasticy, just pour a little bit of oil into your bowl and then pop your dough in there. And you are just going to cover your bowl with cling film. And we're going to let that prove for an hour. Now if we were at school we might not be able to do it for that full hour because we're slightly short on time when we're at school. But if you're doing this at home, please do that. And then whilst that's happening, making sure that you clean down as we always do. And then you can be answering these next 3 questions. So the next 3 questions are: what is fermentation? So that's question 1. What is fermentation? And then, can you explain the conditions needed for the yeast to ferment? So explain the conditions needed for the yeast to ferment. And the final question, name the gas produced during fermentation. So can you name the gas which is produced during fermentation? So answering those questions, starting to clear up, and weighing out your ingredients for your filling as well, and that needs to prove for an hour. So what we are going to be doing now is I have left my dough to prove for an hour, and it's also doubled in size, so I'll be getting that ready shortly. I've then got my sugar and my mixed spice in this bowl. I've got my butter, my softened butter, and I've got currants here, but you can use any dried fruit that you want. So what we're going to do first is just take this out. And you should see that it is much more workable at this point, and very stretchy. So what we're just going to do is just knock it back. So we're just getting rid of the gas that was in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to shape it to a rectangle. I'm going to do that using a rolling pin, and I'm going to get it to at least 30 centimetres by 20 centimetres. It will spring back, so you do sort of need to work with it. It might need a bit of stretching and manhandling into shape. so roughly once it's the right shape and size, and make sure that you have the longest side up against the side of your worktop. That's just going to make it easier when you come to roll it. What I'm then going to do is get my butter. I'm just going to spread that over, and this is kind of acting like a glue for our currants and our sugar. So make sure it's just evenly spread throughout. And I'm just going to take my sugar and I'm actually just going to sprinkle it all over. So I've actually mixed my sugar and my spice together just to make it easier and to make sure it goes all over nice and evenly. And then my currants as well, just sprinkle them evenly over the top. Now I'm going to pat them down slightly so that they go into the dough and sort of stick a little bit. And this next bit is a bit of the tricky bit, because it's trying to make sure that you keep as much of the currants inside. What I would say at this point is, before you even start any of this, is make sure that your oven is preheating. So it's 200 degrees that your oven needs to be preheated for, and then you need to get your baking tray ready as well. So just make sure that you've done that before you start this process. So double check that your oven is actually preheating. So at this point, this is when we're going to start rolling. So this is like we would with a Swiss roll or a sushi. If we've made that in year 8, then you'll know what I mean. So we're just going to curl this round, and we want a nice tight circle at this point. So very carefully rolling it round, keeping all the currants in place, keeping it as tight as possible and even. Now you may lose some currants on the side, but don't worry too much. That's it, there we go. Okay. What we're then going to do is cut that up into pieces. I'm just going to clear these bits. Just going to cut these into even sizes. So for Chelsea buns, we want quite a decent cut. Probably about an inch thick. And we should then start to see that swirl starting to appear in our Chelsea buns. So you can see that there, hopefully. Doesn't matter too much about how close they are. If you've got a nice square tin that they can go into, then that helps keep, if they're quite tight together, that keeps their shape better rather than splitting open. If you've got a square tin, that does help, just stops them from unraveling. And obviously the better your rectangle is, the better your shapes will be at the end. So I'm just going to pop those ones into that little one there. There we go. Okay, so those are then going to go into the oven. And they're going to go in for 10 minutes where the oven is at 200. What's then going to happen is they will go into, the oven will be turned down at 180 degrees after that 10 minutes for a further 10 minutes. So 10 minutes at 200 and then 10 minutes at 180. Now some recipes may ask you to do a second proof, so you'd leave them on the side for another hour, which you can do. And in fact what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave them to proof for a further half an hour before I then put them into the oven. So there you have it. You will notice that my fruit has got a lot bigger as well. It's a real tear and share kind of dish that we're doing today. You can then drizzle sugar water over the top, so you could do that with icing sugar. Just mix it until that is gone to a nice paste and then drizzle it over the top, and then you can serve as it is. Enjoy!